I'm kind of grasping at straws here. I can't think of any good meta messages from the top of my head. All right, hopefully I understand that. So if it strikes me later to give you a good example, I'll throw out a few more. All right, so to recap, we have the feed forward, the feedback, and the meta messages. These are yet another way of we're passing communication back and forth to each other as we are engaging in communication, whether it be a speech or anything else, all right? And then there's context. So there's a speaker, there's a listener, they're passing these messages back and forth, and then there's context. What is context? Context determines the meaning of the message. Context is something that is happening in this moment, right here, right now, in this room, or something that helps you to understand and frame our conversation, okay? So let's say you're walking down the hallway, all right, and I'm talking to my friend right here in this room, and I say, you do this again, I'm gonna kill you. And that's all you heard walking down the hall. Now, what are you gonna think? You have a choice to make. You're gonna interpret my communication with my friend that you just saw a little piece of it. You just heard one phrase, that's all you heard. You're just walking down the hallway, minding your own business. All of a sudden, you hear that. You do this again, I'm gonna kill you. You're like, Professor Sharp is gonna kill him. I better call 911. We have a premeditated murder, right? You have to make a decision, what do I mean? The truth is that you have no idea what the context is. I could have been telling a story. Or I could have been actually saying something that somebody else said. It's not me that said that, somebody else said that. I was quoting somebody, but you didn't know that because you didn't hear the whole thing. So what happened is you heard that message out of context. You don't know what was around and about those words that made those words make sense to a person to whom I was speaking. So it makes no sense to you because you don't know the context. How did I say this message? How did I mean it? What was it about, really? Was it even directed to that person? You have no idea. All you heard is a tiny little snippet. So context determines the meaning. What is meant is all about context. And so contexts have at least 4 aspects. We have the physical context, the cultural context, the social, psychological context, and the temporal context. So let me unpack that. Of course, the physical context is the environment itself, where we are, right? If we're in a classroom, our context is classroom. So everything that I say to you here should be understood as a communication between a teacher and a student, right? That's our context. So whatever I say, you're going to interpret it in light of, oh, he's just trying to explain. If you and I were friends, and we were sitting in a coffee shop and we were talking, and I was talking to you the same way that I'm talking to you right now, you probably would be offended. Because you'd say, he's lecturing me. That's not what friends do in friendly conversation. You're supposed to just talk, right? And instead, he's just unloading all the stuff on me and telling me how to live my life and how to communicate, right? But see, in the context of a classroom, this is fine. In the context of having a coffee with a friend, you're like, what are you doing? You're delivering a lecture. That's not what we're supposed to do here. We got together for coffee. I'm not ready to have class, and you're not my teacher. So you know what happened? Same words, fine, they're okay, wrong context. All of a sudden, completely different reaction, completely different meaning. They're wrong. It's not supposed to happen that way. So physical context makes a big difference, okay? Cultural context. People have their cultural beliefs and their lifestyles that they embrace, and what is being said will be judged through that belief or context or whatever lifestyle they embrace, whatever values they embrace. If they think something is bad, and I say that, they're going to have a negative reaction. But another person sitting right next to them thinks that that's just fine, and they're going to have a positive reaction. So a lot of times people will have a diverse reaction to the same exact words and the same exact messages, because those words culturally mean something to them, and culturally they mean something else, okay, depending on whatever your culture is. So yes, cultural context changes the meaning, okay? I could say a word, and culturally it could be very offensive, and I may even not know it. I may be completely clueless that it's culturally offensive. I have no idea that I'm being rude, because The only culture I know, or the culture that I'm familiar with, or a culture that I know about, that's not a problem. But in that other culture, that's a bad thing to do, or a bad word to use. I didn't know. See, that happens. Context, again, determines the meaning. How was meant? What was it? Social psychological context is another aspect where, it's really the relationship between the speakers that determines the meaning. So, for example, a parent can speak one way to a child, but the child can't speak that same way to a parent, right? It just doesn't work. A boss can speak one way to an employee, but the employee can't speak that same exact way to the boss. This is where the social psychological context is different. And what one person says to another person, it really needs to be understood in light of their relationship. Okay? Their relationship changes the meaning of the words. Okay, me criticizing somebody who's my friend, who's close to me, or a family member, and being very critical of them is going to be interpreted very differently than me criticizing a complete stranger, a person I do not know. Why? Because if I have a close relationship with a person and I criticize them, they know I love them. They know I care for them. They know that what I'm saying is not trying to put them down. I am just expressing how I feel and expressing something that I see that's wrong, right? But it's okay. But if I do that same exact thing to a stranger, we don't have that understanding of a good relationship. We don't have that friendship. We don't have that love. And they will take offense at those same exact words that I say to them, even if I'm right. Doesn't matter if I'm right or wrong. The relationship determines that meaning. It determines how the message is understood and accepted. And then there's a temporal context. And so sequence of events, basically. You don't talk at the same time after someone tells, that you kind of have to, that what just happened changes everything. Let's put it this way. A terrible tragedy just happened. There was a school shooting, let's say, down the street. And I'll say, yay, let's go party, right? And you're like, really? There's a whole bunch of people just died. And you go, yay, let's go party? Wrong time, see? It's not what I said was wrong. Wrong time. When something terrible happens with another human being, we are supposed to stop and consider that, because out of sense of honor and respect and dignity towards somebody else's life has been gone, we should say, you know what, this is not a right time to party. It's just disrespectful. So there are certain things that we can do, just wrong timing, Something terrible happened and I'm being disrespectful that way. Or I don't care. Somebody broke out with their boyfriend or girlfriend and I say, let's go do this. And they're like, I don't feel like doing this. I feel terrible right now. What I really want is for you to sit down on the couch with me and talk, I just want you to hear me out or something. And you're like, oh no, let's go do this. Let's go play a game of basketball or something. And you're like, no, that's not what I need. Wrong time. Again, it's not what I'm saying is bad. It's how it is perceived and understood because of the timing is bad. So anyway, you can fill in the gaps in some of these situations of how they can happen. All right, so that's context. So now you understand what the context is. Context is the setting. It could be the physical setting, it could be social setting, it could be cultural. All sorts of context exists. All right. Now, channel. What is a channel? Channel is a vehicle. It is how we deliver the message. So, can you think of any channels out there? Well, give me some examples of channels. What is a vehicle? What is a device through which I deliver a message? That's what we call a channel. Well, obviously talking, my voice is one of the ways I deliver the message. But I could choose to type it and put it on PowerPoint, right? And that's channel number 2. So guess what? When I'm talking to you right now, I'm communicating through channel number 1, channel number 2, right? Then if you have a textbook, channel number 3, right? Then I got a video going over there, channel number 4. I'm communicating on multiple channels right now. If this was a live video and the students were actually watching on the other side, it would be even cooler, right? So that's what I mean by channel. Okay, so these are the parts and bits and pieces of our model, of our communication model, okay? So we talked about context, talked about channel, noise. What is noise in our communication? So we have one person and another person communicating, messages flowing, there's context, and then in the middle of that, there's also noise. What does that mean? Well, it could mean pretty much anything that interferes with a message. Anything that makes the message hard. So for example, an interruption in class like that, that's what we call noise. Why? Because it just disrupted my lecture. It just disrupted my flow of information. I was tracking with you and all of a sudden, boom, interruption. That's noise. Your concentration is lost on what I'm doing. My concentration of thought is lost. That's an example of noise. Right? I'm not saying Dr. Chan is noise. I'm sort of saying that that's one of the ways in which a noise can manifest. Okay? Anything that just kind of gets you off of your message. And it could be physical, it could be physiological, it could be psychological, or it could be semantic. Now these are all big words, all right? So let's consider them. Physical noise, obviously, if somebody decided to blast music outside of that window and we couldn't concentrate what we were talking about, right? That would really distract, because that's physical noise. So I can't hear you and you can't hear me and we have to yell and scream because somebody's mowing the lawn outside the window. Okay? I've had that in class. I had to teach a whole class with the guys working on the lawnmowers right outside my window. So annoying. Physiological noise. Sometimes people just can't hear. Sometimes I have an accent that people don't understand, right? What if I can't pronounce words clearly? What if I have a terrible accent? Then you can't understand me. That's noise. What if I speak very softly like this and you can't understand me because I'm not even moving my lips because I'm mumbling and I'm not clear, right? So if I choose to speak softly and quietly, all of a sudden even though I'm saying all the good things and all the right things, you're still not getting me. That's noise, because you're struggling and you're not getting it. Well, what if you just have a hearing problem? People get older, they lose hearing, have accidents, maybe they can't see anymore. All of a sudden, that's noise. That detracts from my message being delivered. It creates a problem, a barrier between me and you. That's noise. That's really what we're talking about, okay? So physiological, then we have psychological. Psychological refers to basically your mental state, okay? You can be distracted in your own mind, okay? I can be talking to you about communication and you're thinking about something else because it's on your mind, because it's important to you. Something happens, something that basically distracted your attention, and that's important to you, and therefore whatever I say just goes into the non-important category. That's noise. Noise because now I'm not able to get what I want into you, and you're not able to receive it because there is a barrier between us. And that barrier happens to be psychological barrier. Not noise outside the window. It's in your head. The noise is in your head, essentially, in your own mind, or in my own mind. That's just as much true, okay? And there's the semantic noise. Semantic noise has to do with when you simply do not understand what is being said. Semantics. People define words with different meaning, okay? Words do not mean the same things to different people, okay? So if I say hat, what hat do you think of? I say hat, think baseball hat, right? So that's the first image that comes to your mind. You know what I was thinking? Top hat. How similar is top hat to a baseball hat? Not similar at all. I just said hat, but I didn't specify what hat. So you just went to a baseball hat and I went to a top hat. It just shows how we think differently, right? And that's okay. But the problem is that semantically, we're not speaking about the same thing. We're actually speaking about different hats. Although both of them go on our head, they don't look the same, they don't mean the same. What happened if I showed up to to a soccer practice wearing a top hat. People would think I'm crazy, right? They would, because it's like inappropriate and it's wrong. And so, again, semantically, we're not connecting. And so I say this word and you understand it to mean that, well, I really meant something else. Now I'm being silly by using the word hat, but it could be something much more serious, right? It could be something much more serious. I could have used another word that had to do with more serious matters in life than just clothing or something like that. So you get the idea. So sometimes we simply do not connect semantically. I say one thing, you understand another thing, and that means we have a disconnect, and that means that's noise between us. That means there's a barrier between our communication. You're not getting what I'm saying. Okay? So that's one of them. And the other aspect is the effect. So communication always has some effect on those who are involved in this communicative act. So it is affecting you. It's affecting you possibly in a personal way. There's some sort of a consequence. And you're thinking about those consequences. You know, so right now you're sitting in class and you say, I really need to listen because this is going to be on the test. That's an effect. It's affecting you. So our communication has a direct effect on you. You're not just listening because you're interested. You're listening because, well, you're going to have to know this stuff later. That's an effect, you see? And how you listen changes based on that effect. Now, you may have not realized that this all is actually a part of a communication model, but it is. So here it is. You have the source and the channel. You have the person listening and receiving. You are encoding messages and decoding messages at the same time. Because when I say a word, you have to figure out what that word means, right? So I'm encoding a meaning into a word. You got to decode a meaning out of the word. So I might give you a little feed forward. I might give you a little warning, right? And then there's the context here as well. So the context in which our communication happens does change things a lot, okay? And then there's the message that goes through whatever channels there might be. And there's a feedback going back and forth. And in the middle of us, there's noise. There's distraction. There's a problem. So does that make sense? This is our communication model. That's what we're doing, essentially. Every time we speak, pretty much with anyone we speak with. So the objective that we had was to paraphrase some principles of our human communication. And there are several principles of understanding, and they have implications on how and when and mode in which we communicate. So basically, communication is purposeful. That's principle number one. Think about it. It has a purpose. We never communicate if we don't need to. If we don't have a purpose, we just stay quiet. We don't say anything or don't show anything or don't do anything. We just stay still. And so, well, communication accomplishes goals. That's why we talk. That's why we reach out to other people. And different cultures emphasize different purposes in their communication, but basically there always is some sort of a purpose behind it. And so here's 5 general purposes that are very common. We communicate to learn because we're asking a question or we're wanting to inquire about something, you know, or to relate to another person because we want to understand them, or to help, right? Sometimes to ask for help, right? We also communicate. To influence another person, there's another purpose of communicating. We may want everybody to think like we do, so we talk until we convince everybody to think the way we do. Or to play. Sometimes we just communicate because we want to have fun. We want to enjoy life, we want to entertain ourselves, right? There's many aspects, many purposes behind communication. Not all of them are necessarily utilitarian, where we're just like trying to achieve some sort of a special, you know, strategic goal, let's put it that way. Sometimes it's just fun, right? We just want to have fun. Sometimes we just, human being normal. So, okay. Communication takes place in varied forms. That's another principle of communication. So there's not one way in which we communicate. There's so many different types of communication that there is. So, and therefore, to understand it, you know, you kind of have to reflect on those forms. Okay. There's face-to-face, there's social media, there's all sorts of things. And the forms are important in what we're trying to achieve, right? So if you're trying to achieve certain goals or you're trying to get certain things, then you will choose the appropriate form of communication, right? If you want to ask advice, you probably, about something serious, you're probably not going to go on social media and ask advice there, right? Because you get a bunch of people joking around and never going to give you a serious advice. If you want to ask serious advice, you're going to do something else, right? So, or if you just want to joke around, and you to snap a funny picture, then you put that on social media and say, this is absolutely hilarious, create a caption, and then everybody goes and has fun creating a caption for whatever it is that you captured on your phone. So different types of communication, again, varied communication. Communication is ambiguous. Ambiguous, this is an important part. The word ambiguous could be a confusing word if you don't know it. Ambiguity is something that can be, it means that something can be interpreted in more than one way. When I say, your statement is ambiguous, that means it can mean multiple things. Like, I ask you a question, and the way you answer, it can mean yes or no, right? It's not clear to me. It's like, so a lot of times people speak purposefully wanting to veil the true answer, so their answer will be ambiguous, so that you can interpret their answer both ways. Some cultures are notoriously known for that, okay? For example, Asian culture is one of the cultures that loves to do that. Speak in riddles, right? Give me an answer. Well, here's your answer. Well, that's not an answer, because it says whatever I want it to say. It's subjective, it's ambiguous. I don't really know. I want a yes or no. Sorry, you're not going to get it. And so some cultures are notoriously like that. But in truth, all communication is ambiguous because it is subject to our own interpretation. We can be purposefully unclear, and sometimes we try to be clear and we're still unclear because people still don't get it. And there's multiple reasons for that, but all communication is essentially ambiguous. And communication involves content and relationship. That's almost always, whenever people communicate, there's some sort of a relationship that exists between them. Whatever that relationship may be. It could be very superficial, it could be very deep, but it exists. And it's not just relationship, it's also what is being said as the content. So there's these two aspects. These are the principles, and by principles I mean like these statements of truth, these statements that are just, just are, essentially. They're like axioms. This is what we know and what we can say that's very general about communication. Communication is punctuated. Punctuated means that there are segments. We take pauses, we take breaks, we have sections. So you can see my presentation is very punctuated. There's part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, subpoints, punctuated. There are periods, there are commas. We do the same thing in our verbal communication. We punctuate by making pauses. All right, and communication is inevitable, irreversible, and unrepeatable. How about that? Inevitable, irreversible, and unrepeatable. Now, what in the world do we mean by that? Well, first of all, inevitable, it's because it's always taking place. There's not a time that we don't communicate. It's just part of who we are, okay? And interactions in all situations just occur. It's irreversible, meaning once you have said something, you said it. There's no taking it back. Sometimes you hear people say, I'll take that back. Like, yeah, what you're saying is I didn't mean it, but you can't take it back. Once it's out, it's out. You said it. There's no taking it back. So you can't uncommunicate. Let's say you don't know something, and I tell you. Let's say there's a movie you didn't see, and I spoil it for you by telling you what happens in the movie. Well, you can't just say, oh, delete, 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 and just kind of forget what I said, and then go see a movie and be surprised. You already know what's going to happen because I already spilled the beans, I already told you, right? So you can't unsay it because it's out. I didn't mean to. Well, too late. You already spoiled it. So that's the idea. And then it's unrepeatable. By unrepeatable, what we mean is that there's no way for you to communicate in the same exact way again. The situation will change, the settings will change, the context will change, the emotions will change. When you repeat it When you repeat something, when you say something a second time around, you already know that you're saying it second time around. It was only that way the first time, okay? There's no second time the same thing. It's unrepeatable. You could say the same content, but it will not be the same in every way because it's second time around already. So that's what we mean by unrepeatable. So these are a few little things that kind of principles that are good to know. And that just defines the nature of communication for us. All right, so another objective we had is to explain the role of culture in human communication. Culture is important. I'm of a persuasion that we are very cultural creatures, and that we do what we do, we like what we like, we live the way we live, is because a culture has influenced us in a very specific way. Or we are part of a culture that continues to influence us a specific way, whether we realize it or not. So, what is culture? Culture consists of several things. It consists of beliefs. To define culture is actually quite complicated. But let's just say it for the simple terms, is that it consists of beliefs, ways of behaving, and artifacts of the group. So what does that mean? Culture believes certain values or certain ideas. They believe that something is right, something's wrong. This is the way you do it, this is not the way you do it. You eat with forks, eat with chopsticks, you know. It's just culture. Who says that it's right to eat with forks, and who says that it's right to eat with chopsticks? Culture tells you that's the right thing to do or the wrong things to do, right? So, so there are beliefs, and there's ways of behaving. You know, this is how you do that. This is how you do this. Culture tells you this is the proper way to do it. This is the improper way to do it. So how we go about our day, or how we conduct everything in life, has to do with what our culture teaches us. You know, one person's culture says you get up in the morning, you know, as soon as the sun rises and you pray. Another culture says no, you stay in bed for as long as you possibly can. Two different cultures, two different ways of behaving. All right. And then there's artifacts of the group. By artifacts, we mean these are the physical objects that we're surrounded by. Okay, physical things that we build, things that we create, things that we make. They are also cultural. Okay, the fact that you're wearing a baseball hat is cultural. It's a very American thing to do, actually. You know, because it's like, to me, baseball hats are really an American creation. Other cultures didn't have them until Americans kind of came up with them and made them popular. And now everybody wears baseball hats, but that's a cultural artifact that other cultures now have incorporated into themselves, and they feel comfortable about. So that's what culture is. It just kind of consists of those things, and we transmit culture through communication. We transmit culture by teaching it to other people. Culture is not transmitted genetically. You know that? Culture is not transmitted genetically. So, like, how does one have an Asian culture, for example? You know, being born an Asian doesn't make you Asian in culture, right? You can be born an Asian, raised in Africa. Guess what you're going to be? An African. Because your culture will be African. Even though genetically, you may be Asian. But the people you were surrounded by, the influences, the things that you've experienced in life taught you how to behave in a very non-Asian ways. And appreciate things that are not, most Asians don't appreciate. So all of a sudden you walk, you know, you take a plane to Korea and everybody meets you and they try to talk to you and it makes no sense. Why? Because you're really an African who looks like Korean, right? Boom. It's because it's not genetic. It's learned. All of it is learned. And so how important is culture? Well, because it affects the way we speak. It affects the way we do everything in our life, essentially. Several reasons that are given to us in the textbook is that demographic changes. Our culture here in America changes significantly. There's certain sensitivity to culture that has come to be in America in the past few years. I would have to say if people came to this country 80 years ago, let's say if you came to this country 80 years ago, you would have been treated very differently, you know, than now. Today, people are very accepting of outsiders and foreigners and things like that. But 80 years ago, in some places, people will treat you mean just because you're an outsider, because you don't fit in with everybody else. You know, you're not like everybody else, you look different. you speak a different language, all of a sudden we don't like you. We're going to treat you differently. We're going to be mean to you, by the way. So today we have a certain cultural sensitivity because our demographics have changed in America. But when you're a minority coming into a world in which you're a minority and all of a sudden the majority is not like you, it's very easy for a majority to kind of be mean and persecute a minority. Okay? But we're living in a society today that's taken a different turn, where we learn how to appreciate culture, and we actually are treating people who are not like us nicely. But that's a cultural change that has occurred very recently, essentially, in our society. There's economic interdependence. We realize that we live in a big world. Whatever happens on the stock market in China affects me today. That's a reality. Okay. There's communication technology that exists today that allows me to communicate with people from all over the world. Okay. For example, not a day goes by that I've not talked to people who live at least 8 or 10 time zones away sometimes. Just that's my life. It's normal with me. I talk to people who live 15 minutes from me, and I talk to people who live on the other side of the globe every day. And that's just normal. That wasn't reality 15 years ago, 20 years ago. That wasn't there. We live in a different world today. And so we have, sort of say, the communication is affected by culture in a variety of ways. So there are certain dimensions of culture that are mentioned in the textbook that I want to highlight for you very quickly. One of them is uncertainty avoidance. Uncertainty avoidance. Some cultures are very uncomfortable with uncertainty. It just makes them very, feel terrible, sort of say, to not know what's happening. And they would like to avoid that, to not know what's happening. And they take remedies to make sure that they do that. So other cultures are okay going into the unknown. So that really depends on that. So the whole masculinity, femininity aspect, we have cultures that are more patriarchal, and we have cultures that are more matriarchal. We have cultures in which women are seen on a higher level, and we have cultures in which women are seen on a very low level. Again, that affects how people speak and have relationships with each other, even in our world today. Why? Because you encounter people from various cultures, and they were raised that way, and they can't even help it, but deep inside, that's what they have. And that's, so how they treat people around them will reflect on that. How they communicate will reflect on that. So the power distance, again, some people are raised in hierarchical societies where hierarchy is very important. Everybody's on this level and this level and this level, and you recognize those levels of hierarchies, and other cultures don't recognize levels of hierarchy. Everybody's equal and on the same level. They treat everybody the same way, more or less. There are degrees. Nothing is extreme, nothing is perfect, but power distances and things like that. So some people of certain class never speak to other people of other class, ever. Not even communicate, not even be in the same room together, because they're from a different class. They're from a different strata of society. So individualism, collectivism is another aspect of culture that's very pervasive and very much affecting our culture. People who come from individualistic culture, where everything rotates around me, think and believe and live in a very specific way. And people who come from a collectivistic culture, like Asian culture, for example, tend to think about everybody else a lot. And what they do is affected a lot of times by what everybody else does. Where people from individualistic culture say, who cares? I'm going to do what I want to do. I don't care if they don't do it. I don't care if they don't like it. I'm still going to do it. So these decision-making and positions and the way we conduct ourselves are affected by individualism or collectivism. Okay? High and low context culture is another aspect. That's something we're going to get into a little bit later in the course, I hope. But there are some cultures that value context of what's happening, and they communicate in a way for the context to speak, where other people disregard context altogether and they just spell everything out exactly with words. So some people are more ambiguous because they're relying on the environment to fill in the gaps. Other people are more explicit because they're not relying on an environment at all, or in a setting, or in a context. They're just saying everything, exactly the way it is. And again, that's a cultural feature. Cultures are never just 100% one way or 100% the other way. There's usually a mix, but there's degrees of variance.
So indulgence and resistance, that's another aspect of culture, and long and short-term orientation. So there's a lot of, I can go on about all of these, there's a lot of different dimensions of culture that affect our communication, but these are some of the big ones that I wanted you to know about. Okay, so there's, let's see, let's skip a little bit here. All right, so we're getting there. So one of the objectives we had is to define communication competence and explain what qualifies it. So what does it mean to be a good communicator? What does it look like, essentially? That's what we're trying to say. If I'm a good communicator, what does it look like, essentially? And so that's what this section is about. So competence is an ability to communicate effectively. That's what we mean. And so there are 5 major traits of a competent communicator that our textbook authors give us. And so here are the traits. The competent communicator thinks critically and mindfully. Okay? That means you're able to evaluate messages that come to you. You don't just, hear something as a communicator and not be able to process it. Like, you don't just believe everything you hear. And this is what thinking critically is, asking the right questions about any sort of information that comes to you. If you hear somebody talking about a sale, oh, they're giving away this, 99% off. And to yourself, you're thinking, well, what kind of a business can exist giving away things for 99 cents? For 99% off. That's not a business model. There's got to be a catch. That's your critical mind thinking. There's got to be more to this. That can't just be straight up. So your critical mind starts thinking about it. And so thinking critically and thinking mindfully, a good communicator is always processing, always analyzing what is being said or communicated back or any sort of a feedback. And so you're constantly mindful of your surrounding. But then there are some people who are mindless in the sense that they don't analyze anything that comes up. They just ignore life, so to say. It just hits them, and they're like, I don't know what that means. You got fired for the 17th time. So I guess I'm unlucky. Like, I think that means you're a bad worker. That means you have some bad habits probably. They're like, no, I'm just unlucky. Everybody hates me. Whatever. Like, that's a person not really critically thinking about their experience. So there's that. So there are things you can do to be more mindful. Okay, and so you have a few suggestions that the authors of the textbook give you. The competent communicator makes reasoned choices. Reasoned choices. Basically, you think things through. Not just critically analyze something, but you judge things, you characterize things, you organize things in your mind. Each situation is going to be different, and you're being reasonable. Just because it worked this way first time doesn't mean it's going to work the same way second time. It's unreasonable, actually, to think that. So people say, well, the last time that happened, well, why can't it happen again? Why does it have to happen that way again? Again, it's just, these are the ideas. So you always have multiple things, sort of say, in your toolbox. Let's put it this way. You have a problem. You have to fix it. Think of your life as carrying a toolbox with you. Whatever problem you encounter, you get the tools out to fix it that are appropriate for the fix. Okay? Yeah, you could take the back of a screwdriver and try to hammer a nail into a wall, but that's not what the screwdriver is made for. Well, it worked. Well, not really well. It also ruined the back of a screwdriver. But you always have a toolbox. So every time you're presented with a problem in life, you come up with a solution by using the tools that you have, the abilities that you have. And so problem-solving skills, sort of say. So competent communicator just makes choices, makes right choices. This is right for this moment, and this is right for this moment. And this is good in this setting, and this is not good in this setting. And sometimes it's just being reasonable, and sometimes it's thinking it through. analyzing the situation is what helps you to get there. And so the other features is the competent communicator is an effective code switcher. Now, code switching is something we all do, and that is the type of a language we use, the way we communicate. We employ different styles of communication depending on who we're speaking to, okay? So if you were a teacher and you were teaching 5-year-olds, how you would communicate with them would be different than how you would communicate when you come home and you speak to your spouse. See what I mean? You switch. Or if you're speaking to an elder who has a hard time hearing, the way you would communicate with them would be very different than the way you communicate with somebody else who's fine and they're quicker. Let's say you're one of your friends from class or something like that. So we switch codes. We switch ways of communicating, even languages sometimes. So, and then another aspect is the competent communicator is culturally aware and sensitive. If you're going to communicate to people who are not like you, you're going to have to think of how they are different from you and try to imagine, what's going on in their mind, sort of say, how they will react to what you're saying. Because the likelihood is, if they're not like you, they're not going to take what you say exactly the same way that you take it. So you adapt that communication based on your expectations or knowledge or competence or understanding of their culture. And it's never perfect and it's never 100%, but you just do the best way you can. And that's really what makes you competent, essentially, or more competent than people who don't take these things into account. Competent communicator is ethical. What is ethics? Ethics is a study of what is good or bad, or right or wrong, moral or immoral. So people do not want to speak to somebody who is not ethical. Meaning, if I say something to you and you believe me, and then I turn around and say something completely opposite, you want to believe me, but you're like, wait a minute, that's opposite. And then I say yet one more thing, and it's completely different from all those things. So all of a sudden, I'm no longer consistent. I'm not ethical. I made a promise, I didn't keep it. I don't stick to a standard anymore. And now you don't know whether anything comes out of my mouth is true or whether you can believe me anymore, because I'm not being ethical, because I'm not being consistent with what I'm saying. And so how do you communicate with a person like that? You don't, because you don't know what to believe. You want to have a communication that has trust, and you don't have that trust anymore. So that's the idea. And so there are different views of ethics. I'm not going to go into that, but basically that's our idea. All right, that pretty much ties up most of our chapter. Okay, please look over your textbooks.